This video is sponsored by World Anvil. What do your players need to know about your campaign setting? How much do they need to know before making their characters? This is the eternal tension lots of game masters grapple with, whether you're building your own campaign from scratch or using a pre-existing campaign. You have all this information, but you don't actually know how much your players need to know. Honestly, this depends on how big a role you expect your setting to play in your game. If you're running a very typical medieval fantasy game in a very typical medieval fantasy land setting, there may not be that much your players need to worry about. On the other hand, if your world has a lot of factions, or the nations are on the brink of war, or there's a lot of lore around each ancestry and their role in the world, then that is all stuff your players might actually need to know. Additionally, sometimes you may have a player who really wants to tie their character into your world in more detail. They want to know what sorts of mysteries or secrets your world has to offer so they can tie their character into the larger lore of your world. And they just want to know how they can fit their character into your world better. Exactly, that's what I've been asking about all week long. As we saw in the last episode, when Mad Dog Mike made a character and then just wouldn't leave me alone until I told him more about my world. Mad Dog Mike? No, my character's name is Mad Dog, and I'm Mike, so if that's what you want to call me, that's fine, but all I know is that you are going to tell me some more about your world so I can finish my character, because I've got this really cool idea for a character who has this diary that's got 7 missing pages. It was written by his friend / maybe ex-boyfriend, not really sure, kind of. You have to see what happens when they meet up again, and now that character's lost, and he's got this diary, and he's trying to track down whatever mystery this character was looking into before they vanished, but I can't finish doing that. I can't figure out what's in the diary and what they want for their quest unless you tell me something about the campaign setting. I can't finish my character without knowing anything about the world. So, what do you got for me? See what I mean? But honestly, Mad Dog Mike is kind of the exception. He wants to know about the world, and there are plenty of players that do. But also, sometimes players don't even think to ask. But you still have these really strong feelings about what sorts of characters would make sense in your world, and you want to figure out how you can get that information to your players in a way that doesn't overwhelm them. That's actually why I partnered with World Anvil, the sponsor of today's video. Because when I started a recent campaign, I had a lot of information I wanted to share with my players so they could make characters that fit into my world. Characters that really only made sense in this setting and took advantage of everything I think is cool about the world of the game. But I didn't want to overwhelm them with too much information, especially if it wasn't going to be relevant for character creation. And I think I was able to strike a really solid balance where I gave my players just enough information so they could build their characters and get invested in the setting, but I didn't overwhelm them with too much lore. I think if you take that same approach at your own table, this balance might work really well for you as well. See, my friends and I just started a new campaign using the 2024 rules. It's the first time this group has used these rules outside of just a one-shot when the player's handbook came out. So now we're actually running a campaign and we have access to all 3 books. We did our session 0 back in December, right before the holidays, because I figured that would give us a chance for them to create their characters, and then I would take that information and prep the campaign before we started in January. But I told them, I will get you some information about the campaign setting that we're playing in. Just don't come up with any ideas for your characters yet until you see that information, because I wanted my players to create characters that made sense for the campaign setting. I essentially wanted them to create their characters using the setting as their main point of inspiration. Now, normally, I would not impose a rule like that on my players. But all my players are dungeon masters, they all run their own games, so I really wasn't worried that this requirement would cramp their style. I knew they would rise to the occasion and make a character that made sense for that setting. But more importantly, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to use a pre-existing campaign setting, there was a reason for that. We were going to create characters and adventures that could only be told in that setting. Otherwise, what's the point in using that setting versus another one? Now, this doesn't mean that somebody would not be allowed to come up with a character who couldn't make sense in any other setting, but at the very least, I wanted them to see the setting before they made their characters in case it inspired them. So that's the why. But what about the how? What are the basics that my players need to know about this world before they create their characters? Today, I'm going to start with the most important, kind of the essential question to answer. Then I will expand out to the stuff that's optional to establish before character creation, but helpful if you have the time and energy to share this information with your players. Then start with the basic, most fundamental, foundational question that should apply to any character being created for any campaign setting.
Where'd you grow up?
Now, Sam, where are you from? Sam, where'd you grow up?
I think this is the priority. If you want your players to create characters that have a connection to the world, this is the easiest way to get the most bang for your buck. What is civilization like in your setting, and where do people live? If you're running games in Greyhawk, characters need to know whether they grew up in the free city of Greyhawk or they came there from somewhere else. If they came from inside the city and your campaign is going to be based out of that city, it's really important for them to know the different neighborhoods, NPCs, factions, because they need to know how they fit into that world. On the other hand, if they're coming from far away, you probably need to give them a few details of the other lands outside the walls of Greyhawk, or allow them to have a little bit of free reign in developing the environment they came from. When the cast of Critical Role created their characters for Campaign 2, Matt gave them some guidance on the different countries across the continent, and the players got to decide whether they were members of the Empire, or outsiders to the Empire, or maybe even if they came from another nation that was hostile to the Empire. But knowing whether or not you are from an in-group or an out-group is a really important thing to figure out as a starting point for creating your character. I was running this campaign in the world of Calabris, the setting that Matt Colville created on live streams. I made a video last year about how I started using that setting out of necessity because I just needed a world for my games, but that I also wanted to run a campaign that specifically took advantage of the setting in some more interesting ways. This is the first of those campaigns. Thankfully, I have a map, I have a bunch of different kingdoms, and I know roughly where you could find every ancestry from the player's handbook somewhere on this map. That's really important to me. If I'm going to put an emphasis on how your characters fit into this world, which is sort of the point of this whole exercise, then I want to make sure that I do that for every ancestry in the game. Now, some ancestries don't have a native home in this world because by their very nature, they could be born anywhere. Or you could just put a settlement anywhere on the map. Aasimar and Tieflings can be born into any family, or you might find a small community of them in any city. But they don't have a homeland here. That's useful to know because I believe in Matt Colville's other D&D setting, Orden, Tieflings were just straight up devils from the plane of fire. I might have those details slightly wrong, but the point is, if you wanted to play a Tiefling in Orden, you were literally an alien from another world. That's something your players need to know before they roll up another Tiefling bard. Calabris doesn't really have a civilization of gnomes or halflings, but quite frankly, I basically just imagined that you could drop a little gnomish village or halfling shire into any corner of the map if you wanted to play one of those ancestries. But all the other ancestries have a very clearly defined culture that is specific to Calabris. The Dragonborn are a desert civilization that lives in the Kingdom of Zir, which is a magocracy, and they use their dragon breath to forge weapons and armor out of glass. Goliaths are cliff dwellers who worship the wind, and their elite soldiers ride on griffins. Orcs could probably come from anywhere, but there's this huge enclave of them in the human civilization of Haldrim, due to a recent alliance made between the orcs and the King of Haldrim, and there are also some orcs to the north of Haldrim. The elves have 3 locations on the map, depending on which subspecies of elf you want to play as. The wood elves live in the Vale to the south, a foggy forest that keeps them immortal as long as they're within its boundaries. The high elves live to the west, in Tal and Arafel, and their civilization has mostly gone to ruin. And the dark elves live in the mountains, at war with the dark dwarves on the other side of the Broken Pass, raiding travelers trying to sneak through the canyon. Speaking of dwarves, they used to be the dominant civilization of this territory, but they were overthrown by another faction of dwarves to the north, a kingdom known for their constructs and their war machines, Corim. And this occurred less than 100 years ago, so a dwarf PC very well might remember the better days when the dwarves of Kalazanbar ruled the Spinelands. And if you're playing a dwarf, you might be a member of Khorne to the north, or a refugee from the fallen empire of Kalazanbar in the middle of the map. And whichever one you choose will tell you quite a lot about how other people view you when they find out whether you were part of the nation of good dwarves who kept the peace, or a member of the warmongers to the north who overthrew the great leaders of this land. And of course, if you're a human, there are lots of different nations you could have come from. The Northern Sanction is made of 3 nations. Cardus, with the strong military currently occupied in a war with the Snake Men to the east, Ardenia with its bardic colleges, and Haldrim with its treaty with the orcs and its inevitable succession crisis. There's also a nation of horse lords to the southwest, and they raid other travelers on the road and worship the volcano in the heart of their land. And on the water, there's the port city of Titan's Gate, which is established and protected by the Northern Sanction, but where you can find maybe anyone from any culture or species in that port city. Now, does that seem like a lot of information? Maybe when you hear it all at once, but it was really only 1 or 2 sentences per ancestry. It's not that bad. But now we have 11 different locations that your character could be directly tied to, and that could give you a very strong idea of what culture your character belongs to. And this helps to shape how they view the rest of the world. If you do nothing else, you could just do this, and you will reap enormous rewards. In our Session 0, I literally just took what I just described, 1 or 2 sentences per location, and I pinned them on the map. Rather than just giving them a download like I just did to you, a player could just hover over each of these pins, see a little preview, and if they were curious, they could click on it and read more. Because that's a cool thing about World Anvil. You can link articles directly onto the map that you upload. And so when they click on that article, there's a little bit more information there. Not a lot more, but just enough to help them make up their mind about whether they want to come from that location or not. But as far as I'm concerned, every time they click on one of those articles, that's a win for me. Because that means that just that tantalizing little bit of information I've given them so far was enough to draw their interest. Now, to be fair, Calabris is not a very long document. There's not a lot more information than what I just gave you for each of those locations. There is more. We'll talk about some of that in a minute. But there's still a lot less detail than you'd find in a larger resource, like the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. And if you're using a larger resource like that, you might not even know where to start when you're trying to sum up everything in a quick 1 or 2 sentence pitch like this. But actually, it's probably easier than you think. Most modern setting books have an introductory section that gives you a super brief outline of just the major relevant areas. You can just copy that directly into a pin, so that's all the players see when they hover over it, and it gives them all the information they need to know. If I was making a World Anvil page for a Wildmount campaign, I would just drop a few pins down on the map, much like I did here, for each general area of the map, and I would just grab a few paragraphs from the first chapter. For the pin for the Dundalian Empire, it would read, "The Dundalian Empire is a young, ambitious state born from decades of strife in western Wynandir, the heart of Wildmount. Its austere lands are dotted with tiny villages, ruins of ancient civilizations, and pockets of uncharted wilderness." That's it. It's a direct copy-paste right out of the book, and that's all I need. For the Clovis Concord, it would read, "The Clovis Concord is a republic of city-states lining the Menagerie Coast, the westernmost shore of Wildmount. This tropical region is rich with history and known for a lively, free-spirited culture that contrasts sharply with Wildmount's other, politically narrow-minded nations." That's more than enough information to put into a pin, and then when a player hovers over it, they read that, and if it interests them, they click, and they read the full article, and that tells them a little bit more about the setting. Although that definitely leads us to our next question. What sort of information do you put into these articles? Am I saying that you should map out everything in your world, write out these articles before your session 0? No, I'm not. As nice as it would be to be able to do all that, that might be overkill. Like, if I'm building my World Anvil page for Calabris, if my players don't want to play anybody from Tal and Arafel, and my adventure isn't going to take them anywhere near Tal and Arafel, then why would I write more than a couple of paragraphs in the article about Tal and Arafel? I want to make sure there's enough information in that article to inspire a character. And certainly if I'm inspired, I can always add more details, but for your session 0, you really only need a couple paragraphs. And that can absolutely be enough for your session 0, as long as your focus is on giving your players enough context to know more about that culture. If they're not interested in playing someone from Haldrim, they won't click on the article. They won't know what information is in that article, and they will play someone from another culture who is ignorant about the details of Haldrim, which works totally fine for me. Their character wouldn't know that much about Haldrim, but if they're interested in being from Haldrim, then when they click on that article, they'll find out a little bit more, at least the essentials about that kingdom. So what are those essentials? Well, this is where I answer question 2. Who is in charge? That's the second thing your players need to know. In the example of Haldrim, if someone clicks on that article, they will find out that the king is in his 90s, and he has 2 daughters. The oldest, and the next in line, lost her husband to the orcs, so she is beloved, and has the sympathy of the people. Her younger sister is a wizard or an enchanter, and the locals do not trust her because of her mysterious, unknown magic. Now, this is by no means the only information I have about this kingdom. Everything that's been written about Calabris, like I said, is pretty short. I maybe only have 1 or 2 more sentences than what I just described, but this is the information that would be available to the players if the characters came from this kingdom. Who's in charge? On the other hand, if somebody clicks on Cardis, they discover that King Godfrey is a teenager, and his father, King Edmund, was lost in the war with the Snake Men, although his body was never recovered, which means there are forever going to be rumors that he didn't actually die, or at least that it was not the same heroic death that they were led to believe. There's also a mention of Knight Commander Duncan, who trains and advises the young king, and the king is a capable warrior, and he's eager to avenge his father. If you're going to play a character from Cardis, you do need to know that the new ruler is a child, and that a lot of people wonder if his father died a hero, like everyone says, or if something else happened. And you need to know that it seems like young Godfrey is about to drive you into a new phase of war. I have a lot more information than that, but a level 1 character likely would not. So that's all I put into the article. Again, if you're drawing off of a much more detailed setting, someplace more like the Forgotten Realms, where there have been full books written about every single city, it can be really tough to know how to condense all the relevant information into a short, manageable amount of content. I tend to keep it to just a couple paragraphs, each one not super long. And if you're looking at a bigger resource where a city or a kingdom has its own chapter, I might just pull directly from the introduction to that chapter. And again, when you're in doubt about how much to include, I just stick with who's in charge, because I think that's the most important information that a player might need to know. For example, if we go back to Wildmount, there's a gazetteer section of the book that breaks down the map into smaller regions. There's a section on the Menagerie Coast, a section on the Zemni Fields, the Wastes of Xhorhas, etc. But you can just skim through each section and drop the important details into an article, and that's a really solid starting point for your session 0. For example, if a player clicks on the pin for the Dundalian Empire, here's everything you might need to put into that article. King Bertrand Dwendal rules the Dundalian Empire from the city of Rexentrum. The Cerberus Assembly, a collection of powerful wizards, helps enforce law and order, although it is rare you will see a Cerberus Assembly member out in the smaller farming towns that make up the majority of the Empire's dominion. Most of the Empire's forces are focused on holding the line against the Kryn dynasty to the east. Even so, the growing ferocity from beasts and creatures that share this region mingle with the whispers of a recovering criminal element and the escalating war with the Kryn to create a perpetual air of tension and anxiety. Some of those lines are direct quotes from throughout that section of the book, and others are just summaries of larger sections. Obviously, you might have a whole lot more information, and I know it's tempting to give all those details to your players, but for your session 0, that's plenty. It's enough to get your players to get a quick glimpse of the region and figure out if that's where they want their character to come from. Although if you wanted, you could write articles for a couple of towns or cities and link them to that article, but I'd resist putting a pin for each of those on the map just yet. For your Session 0, just focus on broad strokes. But if your player hovers over the pin for the Wastes of Xhorhas and seems interested, and they click on it, and they go read the article that summarizes the Wastes of Xhorhas in just a couple paragraphs, then inside that article, I think you could include links to articles for other smaller regions inside Xhorhas, like Asterius and Bazzoxan and the Ruins of Draconia. So if the player says, hey, Xhorhas seems cool, I think I want to be from there, where can I be from inside of Xhorhas? Then they could keep clicking through whatever articles you have available and see if they want their character to come from any of these specific locations. But I think that's the trick. Don't overwhelm your players with too much information up front. Instead, you could try nesting that information inside other articles. So if they want to keep learning more, they can keep going further and further down that rabbit hole and following that trail to get as much information as you're willing to give. Well, okay, that depends on how much information you're willing to give, and in fact, I'd argue you should hold back rather than oversharing, especially when it comes to certain mysteries, but we'll come back to that. The point is, don't overload your players in Session 0 with pins and articles. It's just going to all blur together for them. Start with just broad strokes, and the more you zoom in, the more resources you can give them. Now, there's one more big piece of information that a lot of players will specifically ask about when they're creating their character, and this is the third big question I think you have to answer. Who are the gods of your world? Unfortunately, this is something that I didn't wind up having time to add to the World Anvil page before our Session 0. You might remember that last December I was pretty busy around here, but I was just able to answer their questions about the gods in our Session 0 because I had an answer ready. I just hadn't had a chance to sit down and put it into the page. In this case, Calabras doesn't have an established pantheon. There wasn't one developed with Matt Colville. He definitely assumed that you would use the canonical gods of the non-human cultures in D&D, so the elves pray to Corlon, the drow worship Lolth, etc. So I decided to just take that a step further and just use the best pantheon from D&D, the gods from 4th edition. Thankfully, my players pretty much already knew that pantheon, so that was no problem at all. And I could also just tell them that the Goliaths worship the 9 winds, and that was the only other sort of essential religion that they need to know about in this world. If the players wanted to know more about that culture, they could ask that question, and I could answer it, but that was a good starting point. However, just giving your players a name and a domain, I think, does not invite them to think about the gods that much. That's why I was so critical, I have been very famously so in the past, about how the resources for 5e, like the Player's Handbook of 2014 or the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, just give you a chart of gods and basically tell you to just figure it out. So how much information do your players need to know about the gods? Well, again, call me broken record, but 4th edition figured out the perfect answer to this question. There's a reason that almost all that material from 4th edition just appears almost verbatim in the Wildmount and Tal'Dorei campaign guides. So let's actually see what it would look like if I was putting together an article for one of the gods. After all, I actually do need to write these articles for the gods, at least for the gods that my players currently worship. So why don't you watch me do that? I'll show you how much, or actually how little information you actually need to include about the gods to still make them compelling and give the players enough information to know which gods they might want to worship. Alright, this is the write-up for Moradin from the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. I have a Moradin cleric in my campaign. I'm literally just going to take all of this and drop it directly into my campaign, because look, it's just 2 paragraphs of general description, 1 description of what he looks like, 1 for a holy day, and then the 3 commandments of Moradin. So what are you expected to do if you worship him? And that's kind of the thing that I always remember being so helpful and evocative when I saw this back in 4th edition, which is it tells you not just what this god is like, but what their followers are expected to be like. And you can decide for yourself whether or not you apply those same beliefs to your own world. So I'm just going to literally copy paste this in here and grab all of this information. And if I want to play with the formatting, I could, but I like that formatting a lot, so I'm just dropping it right in. Oh, and it grabbed the picture. Oh, that was really nice. I did not think it was going to do that. Can I drag this up? Yes, I can. Perfect. And then the picture appears. And actually, you know what? I am going to remove this picture because there's a better place for the picture right up here. And there we go. We have an article for this god. It took maybe a minute and a half. Obviously, I have the benefit of taking this from existing lore that's already typed up and easily presented, but part of the reason I like this lore is because it is so simple and straightforward. You don't need a lot of material to have something that your players can actually use effectively in your campaign. And this will work fantastically. Now, is there anything else you should tell your players when you're introducing them to your world during Session 0? Well, yes, I think so. You should make sure that they know what they don't know. And by that I mean, put some mysteries into your world that the players are going to be curious about. With Collaborus, there's literally a whole southeast section of the map labeled things like the Lich and the Dead Kingdom. And I didn't create any pins for these. I didn't link any articles for my players to see because, as far as I was concerned, I really only wanted to put the pins on the map for the places my characters could actually be from. If I didn't want a character to come from the Dead Kingdom or the swamps of Dreshmore, I didn't put a pin there because I knew I could just tell my players, yeah, there are other dangers in the swamp to the north. I could do that verbally during Session 0. I told my players that there were snake men in the Scale Hills, but I didn't make a pin for that because that's all they know. By not adding any pins for the locations that my players couldn't have come from, it basically meant that they could see all these other places on the map that were more or less unknown to them, except for some really interesting labels. During Session 0, one of my players said, so I noticed that there's this one tile labeled the Lich, and I said, yeah, that's right. And they asked, okay, what do we know about what's over there? And I said, that's it. That's all you know. You've heard rumors and stories that there is a Lich to the east. You've heard of the Dead Kingdom to the south, but you don't know what that means. And this is where I'm of two minds about how much information to give to your players. Sometimes I really like giving them not just a mystery, but a superstition, a folklore. But the problem with that is I can start to get sucked into saying things like, well, if they lived in this world, wouldn't they basically know what the Dead Kingdom was? And that's an impulse I want to fight back against because, first of all, it really does assume that everybody in this fantasy world has as much information about the wider world as we do in our modern world with our information squares in our pockets and access to all the recorded data in the entire world at a moment's glance. But also, I think telling my players too much often takes away the mystery. That doesn't mean that it's not still dramatic, that there's a Lich to the east or a Dead Kingdom to the south. Those are dramatic elements of the world. But right now, my players know literally nothing about either one of them, and so all they have are questions. And more importantly, they have theories. Likewise, I have not told the players anything more about the fog and the veil, but they do know that, for some reason, it allows the elves of that forest to live forever. I think maybe if I was putting my own labels on this map rather than just using what was already there, I would have also added a label to the volcano, something like the Basalt Throne, because that is what that volcano was called by people outside of the Bountura Steppe. The hope is that the players will see something like that and they'll say, hey, what does that mean? But my role is not to answer them. It's not to tell them about all the rumors and plot hooks flying around. It's just to answer by saying, you don't know what it means. You don't know what the Basalt Throne means. You just know the volcano to the south is known as the Basalt Throne, and you have no idea why. But the hope of doing that is that maybe something like that on the map will make the players more curious and invite them to go want to check out the volcano. In the past, I think I've been really insistent that my players needed to have a lot more information before a game. And in some settings, it really is necessary. If you're running a world like Eberron or Dark Sun, or really any setting that so drastically deviates from the typical model of a D&D world, you're going to want to make sure your players have a really clear idea of what makes this world so special and unique. But also, sometimes in the past, I think I've been too eager to share more details about each setting, and I think it overwhelms the players, and it undercuts any sense of mystery. I think using this approach provided a much better value. The players still have lots of information they could use to make their characters and figure out how they fit into the world, but when they asked about some other aspect of the setting, I didn't explain how many kings were in the Dead Kingdom or anything like that. I just said, you don't know. In the past, I've always struggled to know when to stop talking and just trust that the players have enough information about my world. But limiting myself to just pins of the parts of the world a player character could come from, and articles detailing the broad strokes of what that society is like by telling you who's in charge, and some really cool cryptic labels on the map itself that I refuse to explain, that seems like a really good balance. And ultimately, this approach does a fantastic job of telling me which parts of the world the players are the most interested in. In our Session 0, my players created characters from Cardus and Corim, but they showed a lot of interest in Zir, obviously, but also in the dwarven ruins of Kalazambar, which they have some desire to get down into at some point, along with Titan's Gate down to the south. I know there are ways to introduce other adventures that might lead them towards other corners of the map, but right now, during Session 0, I was able to watch which parts of the map they gravitated towards, and it was fantastic. And I'm perfectly happy building a campaign based on those specific locations that my players wanted to know more about. And it was so easy because I used today's sponsor, World Anvil. And if everything I just did seems really cool and exciting to you, then you should check it out yourself. Visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout to save 51% off of any annual membership. And you can do everything I talked about today, plus so much more. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout to save 51% off your order. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video and for helping me run a really fantastic Session 0. But while that Session 0 did answer all the questions that my players had, there's one more player I need to talk to who's not a part of that campaign. How you doing, Mad Dog Mike? Did you figure out where you want your character to come from and which mystery you want the diary to point you towards? Huh? Yeah, no, I've been totally listening to you. Sorry, I've just been scrolling around your World Anvil page and clicking on various things and seeing all this cool stuff you've got going on. And I'm really torn between a couple of things. Part of me really wants to go with the Dead Kingdom, right? That sounds really fun and interesting. You've got the Lich just written on a tile there. That's really fun. But I think my character is going to be from Cardus, because I think that makes the most sense. He's an ex-military character. Cardus has the largest standing army, so I think that makes sense for who he was. He's basically come back from his mission in the Scale Hills, fighting the Snake Men. That's where he had his sort of berserker rage moment, and that's where he got the package when he came back to town. And I think I want that package to basically send him towards a mystery that's going to take him across the entire map. So I don't think I'm going to go with the Lich, because that's pretty close. All he has to do is go back over the Scale Hills, and that's fun and interesting and exciting. But I kind of want to see what happens if he goes down towards, like, the Vale. So I think what happened is that his friend, who wrote the journal, was researching the Vale, was researching the mist and why the elves are immortal, and why they become mortal when they leave the forest. And even though my friend was not an elf, he was very interested in this, he was researching it, and now he's vanished. But somebody still sent this package, probably from Titan's Gate, since that's close-ish to the Vale. It's still a pretty far distance. Someone would have to make it all the way across, get to the Banter Step, and send it from there. But is that where his friend is, or did somebody else get it over there? He doesn't know. But that's probably where he would go next to try to figure out what's going on. And eventually, he wants to get down to the Vale and figure out, you know, what's causing the mist, because that's what the journal's pointing towards. And the last few pages are missing, where he was basically about to enter the Vale. So now my character, Mad Dog, does not have any idea what's in the Vale, if his friend is still there, what happened when his friend went into the Vale, because he knows that he wrote about it, but those pages are gone. Okay, cool, yeah, that sounds like a really cool character. I'll be really excited to run a campaign for him. But more importantly, I guess now that means you have what you want and you're not going to keep bothering me in any videos because I gave you exactly what you wanted. And that means I've defeated another monster of the week. You defeated me? That's a weird way to phrase it. I'm not a monster who needed to be slain. I'm just a guy. I'm just a D&D player. All I want to do is make my character, and I didn't think I was asking that much. But sure, if it makes you feel better to know that you've defeated me, fine. God, look at you, pushing for an adversarial relationship between the player and the GM. I never thought I'd see it from you. Oh, whatever. As long as this means that I won't have to keep dealing with some villainous version of myself who keeps popping up and harassing me throughout the year, I'm happy. Although it was fun to create a character again, I think I'm going to do that again next week. And it's also going to be my belated Valentine's Day video. See, last year I made a video about what it was like to run an X-rated game of D&D, and I've actually gotten a lot of comments from folks who were hoping I'd make another sexy D&D video this year. So, next week, it's time for my sexual-themed, D&D-themed Valentine's Day video. Thank you so much for watching. Yes, that's not a joke. My Valentine's Day video is coming a month late. Don't worry, there's reasons, but you'll find out more about that when I get to that video next week. In the meantime, like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff. Leave a comment with the word of the day. The word of the day is potato. Yeah, I'm sticking with potato. Leave a comment that has the word potato somewhere in it. Yeah, I'm sticking with it. That sounds good to me. Click this video right here. Make sure to watch that. And until next time, play fair and have fun.